The title is I Didn't Know Office Scripts Could Do That. So he's going to show us some cool tips and tricks. My name is James Reeves. I am part of Bedrock Data. We're a consultancy, Azure consultancy, doing data platforms. If you're interested, look me up. That QR code will take you straight to my profile. Assuming you're watching this on video, you can pause it and look at it. We are sponsored by our friends over at Quest Software. They give us a £50 Amazon gift voucher for a participant. So just by being here, you've got currently a pretty good chance of winning. And we just send a gift card, so it's £50 UK sterling, or whatever that translates to in your country. So go take a look at their software offerings. They've been around a long time. I saw them at SQL Bits this year and got chatting to them, and their platform, the amount of different technologies they cover is quite impressive. So take a look at www.quest.com. So you're not here to talk about me or my sponsors, you're here to see the show from Mark Proctor. So with that, I'm going to hand over, and we've already tested it, so Mark can now take over and run the show.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, James. Thank you for having me. Welcome to everyone who is live. I think it's Thanksgiving in the US today, so I think that lots of people will be enjoying turkey rather than learning about Office scripts. But the good news is everyone can watch the recording. So let me share my screen, and then we can make a start. So hopefully
See that?
you can see my screen. Yes, good. Right. So today we're talking about Office scripts, and I didn't know that Office scripts could do that. So Office scripts are a feature of Excel and kind of the Power Platform space. So we're looking at this area and seeing how we can go a bit further and look at some of the things that Office scripts can do that possibly you might not have thought of before. It might even be a technology that you've previously ignored, but the good news is that they are available now and we can start using them to automate our processes. So some background on me. I'm an accountant by trade, and about 2 years ago, I set up as a reporting and automation consultant and trainer. So we primarily focus on Excel and Power BI, but that does include some element of Power Automate and other platforms. I've got a website, excelforgrid.com, and also a YouTube channel, and I am a Microsoft MVP, which basically just means I talk too much about this stuff. That's really what an MVP is. So the agenda for today, we've got three things we're looking at. So Office Scripts 101, we're kind of putting into context, understanding what it is, how it works. Then after that, we're looking at a project, a burst reporting project. And we're going to work through that step by step. That'll be the majority of our time. And then we're going to finish with project number 2, which is kind of an overview. Having taken the lessons that we've learned from project 1, how can we kind of apply that into another project? And we'll look at that for project number 2. So what are Office scripts? That's the first question we should really answer. And Office scripts are a programming language which are to automate common tasks in Excel. At the moment, it's only Excel. It'd be great if they came to Word and PowerPoint and Outlook and all these other applications. At the moment, it's only Excel. I don't know what Microsoft's roadmap is. At the moment, just Excel. But they are designed specifically to empower people who would not consider themselves programmers to create small programs in Excel. So their purpose is to be simple to create, simple to use, so that people who previously might have used VBA now might come across and use Office scripts. However, that comparison between Office scripts and VBA is really important, and they're not a comparable project, a comparable product, and we'll see that in a few moments' time. So Office scripts are effectively built up of 2 separate areas. One is the Excel document object model, or the Office scripts API as it's known. And all that is that's the map of where we find things in Excel. So if we had the value of 10 in cell A1 of sheet 1 of a workbook, how do we find that value? Well, we go to the workbook, then we drill down to the workbook, we get the worksheet, then we go to the worksheet, we go into that, we get the range, and then we can get the value. So that's just a map or a kind of a connection of how we find and label everything in Excel. So that's the document object model. And then we also have TypeScript. So TypeScript is a derivative of JavaScript. It was developed by Microsoft, and it was intended to kind of take away some of the, or remove some of the issues that we find with JavaScript. But to be honest, they tend to be, or we can use them almost interchangeably. But TypeScript provides the language or the syntax that we use. So it provides things about functions, arrays, logic and loops. So anything we do around if statements and arrays and all that, that is based around TypeScript. We then use the document object model to then reference those items inside Excel. Now, TypeScript is primarily a web language, which means that a lot of it isn't relevant for Excel because Excel isn't a web browser. So some of those elements that we find in TypeScript have been removed, where they're not relevant or for security purposes. However, if you dig around enough, there's lots of irrelevant bits that are still left there, just because TypeScript wasn't really designed for Excel. Instead, what they've done is they've used TypeScript as the language to create our entire script and then use the document object model inside it. Now, how we think about Office scripts and VBA. So Microsoft have prepared this, and it's available on their website. You can see the source there, this image that shows us that we have kind of four sections, and depending on whether it's based off an end user or a developer audience, and whether someone's working in the desktop or whether they're working cross-platform and collaboration, it's intended to guide us as to what kind of language somebody might use to work in Excel. So if somebody's a developer, they might use COM add-ins or web add-ins. If somebody is an end user, they might use VBA, or in a cross-platform scenario, they might use Office scripts. However, a lot of developers are using VBA. So this kind of matrix is a bit misleading or simplifying the strengths that VBA has. So I thought it'd be useful if we just go through some of those differences, because the differences between Office scripts and VBA really leads us to see where Office scripts fits and what kind of solutions we want to use it for. Because in my mind, Office scripts is not a replacement for VBA. While people say that, how they work and the environments that they work in are very different to VBA. Therefore, actually, depending on our scenario, it might lead us to a VBA solution or an Office scripts solution. So first of all, Office scripts work on all platforms. So it works on web, it works on PC, it works on Mac. Unlike VBA, which works really well on PC, it works okay on Mac, and on web, it's never going to work just because the environment isn't right. Office scripts are designed with modern security methods in mind. So they exist in that Power Platform or Office 365 environment, and therefore it has all of that security behind it. Whereas VBA, so last year, I think it was April, they had the first attempt, and then June, Microsoft are taking more and more steps to kind of protect users from people who might try and maliciously use VBA. So therefore, VBA doesn't have those modern security methods, and it's constantly a struggle for people to deal with that. A key distinction is that an Office script file is saved outside of the workbook. And that's really important when we think about how we use Office scripts and how we can make Office scripts reusable. And we'll look at that in a few moments' time. Office scripts have a lower coverage of Excel's feature set. Now, they're constantly growing in terms of the amount of features that are covered, but because Office scripts have to work online and on PC and on Mac, there needs to be a consistent feature set across all of those platforms. So therefore, Office scripts can only, the feature set they're going to use as their base level or the highest level is going to be Excel Online. So as that develops, we can expect Office scripts to develop, but equally, because of how Office scripts are structured, they will always have a lower feature set than VBA. Office scripts currently has no internal event triggers. So if we think about VBA, if you select a worksheet, you can run a macro. If you change a cell value, you can run a macro. There's all these events where, as a user interacts with a workbook, that VBA can run macros. Office scripts doesn't currently have any of those triggers. We hope they put them in, but it doesn't have any of those at present. Though we can, I think for the last 18 months or so, we can add a button to the face of our worksheet to trigger our Office script. One of the biggest differences is the fact that Office scripts doesn't have access to any other applications or the wider environment. We're going to look at this more in it might be the next slide or the slide after that, about what that means and how that impacts how we think about solutions. But Office scripts does integrate with Power Automate Online, which means that entire environment that we have, we can use Office scripts and Excel to interact with those areas. We can even use, so sometimes if Power Automate isn't particularly good at handling something, we can even pass information into Office scripts. It can then perform those arrays and calculations and other things, and then pass those values back into Power Automate. So we can use Office scripts without even really needing to interact with Excel if we prefer a programming way of thinking rather than Power Automate's method of working. So when I said about the environments being different and how that impacts things, let's have a look at this example here. So we've got a box here. This box represents an Excel workbook. So we've got two Excel workbooks, and I've got another box that represents some other application. In workbook one, we have a VBA macro, and that macro can control anything on those worksheets or anything in those workbook. Anything in that workbook. Not only that, it can also control any elements in other workbooks and other applications. So that's where the security issue really comes from. That if somebody opens up an Excel workbook, that workbook, when opens, can run a macro automatically, and therefore that macro can do almost anything on your Windows environment. And that's why macros can be quite an issue in terms of security and why they're often used for people who have malicious intent. Office scripts, on the other hand, that script file sits outside of that workbook, so it's an entirely separate file. When we run it, we can still run it so that it changes the items inside that workbook. However, in itself, it doesn't have access to that wider environment. Instead, we have Power Automate. So Power Automate Online, that sits across the entire online environment. And we can pass information and results backwards and forwards between Power Automate. So that means that if we want to run a script and the results of that script then get used in another workbook, what we would do is use Power Automate to interact with our first workbook, pass values or arrays backwards and forwards. We can then use those results to interact with other workbooks or then other applications. So Power Automate is the vehicle by which we can control other applications and by which we interact with other workbooks. Thinking a bit more about the infrastructure and how it works, we have two instances of Excel. We have Excel Online and Excel Desktop. If we start thinking about Excel Online, we interact with everything in Excel Online through a browser. So what we see is Excel, but really that is through a browser. That instance or that application of Excel that is running, now I don't quite know the background to this, whether it is just a version of Excel that's existing on a server or whether it is a special server-based instance of whatever the application is. However Microsoft are running it, I don't know. But effectively, that application sits and exists on the cloud, on the server. And our workbook, because we're in Excel Online, also exists in OneDrive or SharePoint on that server. And any changes we make in our browser are synced back to that workbook, which is available on Office 365, so on OneDrive or SharePoint. If we run an Office script, what that means is that everything is occurring inside that server environment. So those changes are happening inside the server environment, and then it's syncing back to the browser. So that's what we see. So when we talk about performance of VBA versus Office scripts, it's an entirely different scenario. So it's not even a comparable option because of the different environments in which these elements sit and how they sync backwards and forwards with each other. From a desktop environment, the Excel application exists in the desktop, which means that we also have that Excel workbook locally on our PC. But when we run an Office scripts always have to exist in OneDrive or SharePoint. They're the only places where we can save them and still run them. So when we run, even if we're using Excel desktop, when we run an Office script, it's going to go to the server, get that Office script, pull it back, and then run it. Any changes that are made to that workbook, if it is also saved on OneDrive or SharePoint, will then also be synced back to whatever version we have saved on the server. So they're the two different environments as to how we might use Office scripts. And it's quite important to understand that because of this environmental difference, it means that the comparability between VBA and Office scripts, there's quite a lot of differences between them and how we might build solutions. So the question is, do you have Office scripts? Do you have it in your PC? The easiest way to tell is if you have the ribbon at the top that says Automate, then you've got it. That's it. Okay, you're good to go. If you don't have Automate at the top, you need to check whether you've got one of these licenses. So 365 for Business, Business Premium, and so on. So if you've got one of these licenses and your Office 365 is up to date, it means that you should have Office scripts, which is the Automate tab. If you've not got it, it means that it's been turned off by your IT department because it should be enabled by default, and they can turn it on for individual users. So you just need to start begging and saying, please, can I have Office scripts enabled? So now let's move on and think about how we might use Office scripts. We're going to work through a project. We're going to work through a project from the start so we can see how it's kind of built up and how it works. Let's talk through this project actually. So for this project, we have an Excel workbook. This workbook is here. It's a simple enough workbook. I just need to unhide the tab here. So we've got this report. We have 5 regions: North, East, South, West, and Central. And so we can have our region in this cell, and everything will then recalculate based on that. We've also got a date. So if we change our date, that will also then change this report. Now, if we enter a star in there, that gives us all regions. So that means it is including North, South, East, West, and Central. So if somebody who might want to look at that kind of central report that contains all regions might then want to see a sub-report that contains those individual regions. So they get a kind of the consolidated version and then the individual versions. And all of this is just based on a simple table in Excel, 4 columns, nothing particularly exciting about that. So that's the workbook that we've got. What we want to do during this project is, so you can see there the values that we can use. What we want to do is to create a PDF for each of those regions, so north, south, east, west, and central. And we want to send those PDFs to somebody, so Dave, Sally, Winston, Mandy, Jack, and Helen. And depending which region they're in, they will get the relevant PDF of that report. The issue being that Helen, because she is responsible for all regions, she needs that additional worksheet that contains that sub breakdown. Now, to help us with this, we have an additional worksheet. So our first workbook was called burst reporting.xlsx. Our second workbook is called example 1 control.xlsx, and that contains the parameters that we need to run this process. So if we look in here, you can see that we have, so that's the date. If we change the date, that just changes the date in our table. So that just gives us our date, but we have parameter sheet. That's the name of the sheet which contains our parameters. So that's over here, that's called report. Then also we have what's the name of our region, so a table of our regions, a table of the dates we're going to run this for. We use that name for something else. Then which sheets does that person get? So Dave, Sally, Winston, Mandy, Jack, or Helen, which sheets do they get from here? What's the name of the PDF that we want to create? Their name and who we want to send those files to. So for this purpose, we've all got exactly the same email address, but that will help us to see how this works. So that's our goal. That's the first project that we are going to work through. So let's head over into Excel. Now, because Office scripts exist in my environment, that means even once I create this solution, I can't just send it to you or share that file. It needs to be built inside your environment with those connections built. But let's go to here. You can see that we have our Automate tab. Now we can record scripts. So just like Excel has a macro recorder, we can record scripts, but we can also write them from scratch. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to write them from scratch just because we can. I mean, showing how to use a macro recorder isn't particularly interesting, but hopefully for the audience that we've got here and the audience that might watch, writing the code is probably more in line with the way that you think. As you can tell from my introduction.
Quick question, is that like, so in VBA when you record the macro, it's less optimal than actually writing it yourself because it'll do things like select cells where you don't need to, it'll...
So yes, so the action recorder is better than that. So it does consolidate actions together. Let's have a quick look at that. So if I were to record a script, so if I were to record a script, you'd see on the right hand side, hello, world. I mean, even if I click around, scroll a bit, when I click stop, it's better at recording that than VBA is because it's recognized the fact that I've carried out an action that can be completed in a single line. It also has created a variable for me called selected sheet, and then it's used that variable. So the recorder is better than VBA in terms of recording actions, but that means that it doesn't record all the actions. So if you want to scroll around and click some cells and you want that to be recorded, it's never going to do that. That's not part of the API that it's got.
Yep.
But also, if you want to write an if statement or a for loop or anything like that, you've got to write your script because it's never going to understand any of those elements. Let me just close that. And then let's use this script, whichever one this is. Okay, let's give our script a name. So I'm going to put NWTT. I'm going to put change cell. I don't think I've got one of those already. No. So I've created my script. And now let's kind of work through this. So we're going to start with a really simple script that all it's going to do is change the values in these cells. And for that, we're going to work through this document object model. So for Office scripts, the top level of our document object model is the workbook. We start with workbook, then we can go to our worksheet. Just by start typing worksheet, you can see the IntelliSense is quite good. We can go to get worksheet. I want to get the report worksheet. So if you write code normally, none of this will be particularly difficult for you to understand. And even if you don't write code normally, you'll understand how the document object model is constructed. So we get the worksheet, we then get the range. And our range here is called region. And then we want to set that value, and let's set that to north. So that's a simple hard-coded script. There's no huge amount of logic in there. Let's just change the date as well. So we've got a named range called date. I'm going to use that in the get range. So get range, you can use standard cell references. It's also fine. For the moment, I'm going to keep this as text. Don't worry about that. There's a reason for that. So now I have this script, and when I click run, it's going to change those values on that cell, on that worksheet. and then force Excel to recalculate. Now we can, as I said, insert a button for here. So let me save this script. If I wanted to, I could right click, add in workbook, and then I created a button. So you can build kind of simple interfaces to work with. So we click that, it should now, I didn't save my script, so that might not work. Let me save my script. So now when we run that, it'll run that button and change those cells. So we can use a button, we can create a simple interface using that, and that will then just call that script. At the moment, this is this is hard coded, right? It works with one report on where we have two named ranges, one called region, one called date, and we know exactly what those values are. So let's try and think about how we can make this a little bit more reusable. I'm going to create a variable, let ws. Actually, I'm going to create another variable first. I'm going to let ws name equal report. So that is the name of the worksheet we want to use. And now we're going to create let ws equal workbook.get worksheet. And then we want to use the ws name variable. So nothing particularly difficult there. So I've now got, anytime I refer to ws, that refers to this worksheet. Now we also have two cells at the moment, but what if we wanted this to work with multiple cells, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, however many cells we want? How can we do that? Well, let's create an array or a cell list. So let the cell list, and that is going to equal region and date. That they are our two named ranges that we have. If we wanted, we could add more items into that cell list, and then we have our value list. So let value list equal, and let's use East and the 31st of March 2023. Now these are text, so we're going to split those out into arrays so that we can now use them. So let cell list array equal cell list dot split. We're going to split that by separator, and let's create a variable called separator, and that will just be a comma. So what that'll do is that'll take our cell list of region and date and split those into an array with two elements. Let's do the same for our values. So value list array equal value list dot split, and we'll split that by the same separator. So now that we have an array, as it were, we need to loop through our array to make the changes for each of those named ranges. So for that, we can use a simple for loop. So let I equal 0. So I is just the counter. We keep looping while I is less than the cell list array dot length. So it keeps looping while we have items within our cell list array. TypeScript is 0 based, so we start with 0, and then we're going to iterate by 1 each time. So now how we use this array? Well, we refer to ws, which is our worksheet. We can then get the range, and the range that we want to use is whatever item we're looping through. So that's from our cell list array and whatever item we're looping through. So item I from that array. We want to set the value of that based on our value list array and whatever item we're then looping through as well. So we've got two concurrent lists that we are using. So that means this first bit of code, we don't need that at all. But if we run this, we just save the script and click run, it should now make those changes. And you can see that our workbook has updated. So this is a slightly better piece of code, because depending on how many items we put in the cell list, it will update, or cell list and value list, it will update those. Now, so far, all we've got is a script that changes some cell values. What we want to do is to build out our entire process. So we're going to use Power Automate for that. And Power Automate can pass values from Power Automate into Office scripts. So because this is a function, all we need to do is pass those parameters, or have those parameters declared in our function declaration. So rather than it being inside this code, we can use ws name. That will be a string. Cell list, that will be a string as well. Our value list will also be a string. And our separator will also be a string. So now when we take out that code, we haven't got any red underlines, so that's a good sign. We can save that script. So we've now created a reusable script that we can use with Power Automate. So let's head over to Power Automate and let's create a new flow. If you've not used Power Automate before, there's various triggers that you can use. So automated, so that means it's triggered by an event. An instant cloud flow means it's triggered using a button. A scheduled cloud flow is triggered at specific points. Just for ease, we're going to use an instant cloud flow for this, and let's call this NWTT example 1. And we'll use a simple button trigger on that and click create. Now, a few weeks ago, Microsoft updated this interface. I'm still getting used to it. There are some quirks which are different to the previous version. So if I stumble at all on this, hopefully you'll forgive me for that. But we start here with our trigger. Then from that, we know that we want to run this script or run this action for each item in our table, the table that we have here. So we want to run it for every item. So we're going to add an action into that, and we're going to list the rows. So we've got list rows present in table. It's going to ask us, where's the table that we want to get the rows for? Mine's saved on OneDrive for Business. The file that we want to use is here. It's my example one control.xlsx. When we click on the drop down, it should go and get all of those tables in there. I've got one table that's called control.
Just noticed something then, Mark, which is interesting. So you could use a SharePoint list as a driver for this. In terms of, for the parameters. So I'm guessing then that'd be a good way of putting this kind of level of automation in front of business users without them having to know that's what really they're doing. You can just say, look, if you want to update what ones you're interested in, just add yourself to the list.
Yeah, I mean, you can use a SharePoint list. You could equally say, here's my Excel workbook. You could anything that you can create a list from. You could even have it on, if you wanted to go crazy, you could have the list on an SQL server. You can pull down that, that into Power Automate, and then you can loop through that list. Anywhere where you can get a table that you can pull that down, that will work fine.
I'm always keen on self-service especially for reporting things, because you get people go, I don't want that report anymore, and no one knows how to turn it off. So if there's a SharePoint list, go delete yourself from the list, and you won't get any more.
Yeah, and that works perfectly fine, which means you can use all that SharePoint stuff around integration and everything else. You can set up a Power App to handle all that so that you integrate with your SharePoint list. There's no problem with that whatsoever. So we've got our list. We now want to run our script for every item in that list. So I'll add an action, we'll type run script. And we're going to find our run scripts. So scripts now run in SharePoint, so they can be saved on the SharePoint library. That's new for about a few months ago. Ours is saved on OneDrive, so we just need the normal run script option. We now need to find our workbook. So this is the workbook that we want to run the script on. And in our example, that was our burst reporting.xlsx. And then we have a drop down here. You can see all of my scripts. Thankfully, we can search in here. And it was change cell was the one that I just created. Let me just make sure I click save on that. I did, yes, or else I might have the latest version. That brings up all the parameters that we said. So what parameters did we say that we wanted to use? Well, we've got most of those parameters over here in our list. Okay, so what's our worksheet name? Well, that's going to come from our parameter, whatever row we're in, from our parameter table. Our cell list, that was region, date. Our value list will come from our table. That's going to be our region, and then our date. And what separator do we want to use? We want to use a comma. So that should now loop through that table. You'll notice that we now have that rather than just run script, it's created a for each loop because Power Automate has recognized the fact that it's going to run through each item in that table. I'm just going to click save on this. Let's just test it, make sure it works. So it's just saving. Let's click test. Run it manually. Test. Got all these connections here. Done. Now, all that means is that the only thing we really see is that as that starts to run, our Excel workbook should start to update as those changes go through. So there you go, it's now looped to north, and in a moment's time it'll loop to, I think, south. Obviously, in the real world, you wouldn't sit here and watch your worksheet looping through. You just click run and you let it happen, and you just wait for the output to happen. But that's just to show you that without happening, that is happening on that server. That server is then integrating or syncing back into Excel that I have here on my desktop. So let's continue through with all the other steps that we need. So we've got our first run script step. Next, we want to, from our Excel workbook, we want to create a PDF. However, Power Automate's PDF action is convert file using path. So let's add that to start with, and then we'll talk about the quirks of that. Convert file. So convert file using path, which means I can say, where is the workbook that I want to convert? And by convert, it doesn't actually destroy the workbook. It just stores that in memory. So that's our burst reporting file. And it says, well, what do we want to use? I want to save that as a PDF. Now, you notice there's nothing there that lets me decide which worksheets I want to convert to PDF. So that means that it's going to take that entire workbook and convert all of it to PDF. which is a problem because we've got 3 sheets. We've got the report sheet that we want, I think, 5 people to get, and the sub-report sheet, that's the sheet that should only go to 1 person, as you can see here. So each person should just get that 1 sheet. Helen's the only person that gets more than 1. So for that, or to handle that, we've got another script, and this script, so Excel has a quirk that it doesn't let you hide all the worksheets. You've always got to have at least 1 visible worksheet or else it creates an error. So we have a script that makes all the sheets visible and then hides all the sheets that aren't in a list. So we have a parameter called WS name list. We pass that in, and that's the items in that WS name list. They're the ones that are left visible. So let's go and add this script in. So after we've run our first script, we're going to run our second script. We'll add an action. We're going to run a script, the script we want to run, or the workbook we want to run it on. So our OneDrive for Business. Let's find this workbook. So we want to run the script on our burst reporting workbook, and the script we want to run is our sheet visibility script. Should now bring up those parameters. So what worksheets do we want to leave visible? Well, we've got that here inside our table. We've got that in our sheets list. So we either want report visible or we want report and sub-report visible. So we can add that in, and we're going to add that as our sheets parameter, and the separator that we've used there is a comma. So that means that as it loops through, first it will filter that to the right information, and then it will hide the relevant sheets. It will then convert that into a PDF binary, which if we wanted to create a file for that, we could then add another action. So we use create file. Where do we want to save that file? Let's save that in that same folder. What do we want to call that file? That's also in our table. That was in our PDF name item. And then the file content that we want to use, we want to get the file content that we've retrieved from our convert file using path. So if we were to run this script, it would then create each of those PDFs. But we're not finished there. We also wanted to, if you remember, to send this as an attachment in an email. So let's add that action. So send email. Got Outlook, Office 365, send an email v2. Who do we send this to? Well, that's come from our list. We know that's going to, scroll down, that's our send to list. Subject, let's call this report. And then we can create an email, hi, whatever their name was, Dave, John, Mandy, Sally, whoever it was, please find the report attached. Thanks, Mark. We want to add this as an attachment. So I'll select the attachment option, and then we can add that item in. What do we want to call our attachment? That's also in this file here. That's the PDF name. Now, interestingly, when Microsoft made this change to the user interface, there's a change in how it handles some of these items. So hopefully I can make this work. If not, I promise you it does work, but it hasn't worked. For some reason, they've changed how some of these items work. So I want to get once I've converted the file using path, that's the content that I want to use as my PDF.
Yeah, it's a common problem with Microsoft. Live demos of Microsoft's it can be painful.
Well, I think if I save this and close it, when I come back, it might then say that it won't say body, it will then change it into something else. So let's just hope this works. If it doesn't, I promise you it does work. We just need to make a few tweaks to the code. So let's just save this. And now we have, hopefully, our entire flow ready. So we're going to run one script and then another, convert that to a PDF, and then save that attachment. Here we go. Look, here, it's changed this. Even though I didn't want it to, it's now changed to a base 64, which I do not want. So it should, I change that not to base 64, click update. Hopefully that should now work properly. If it doesn't, I promise you it does work. Let's save that. If it doesn't work, we'll find out at the end because it won't create a valid PDF file. Let's test this now. Let's run it manually. Test. Click continue, click run flow, click done.
All the stuff you've demonstrated so far, none of that's premium connector, is it? It's all.
No, it's all basic.
Perfect. So it's available to a lot of people.
Yes. I know this. So there's things like so to convert a CSV file into an Excel workbook, there are premium connectors that can do that. But you can also run, on my website, you'll find an Office script that takes that text string and then parses it and then converts it to an array that you can then create your Excel workbook from. So you don't need to use a premium connector for that. But there are, yeah, nothing here is premium. I've got a premium license which I use for some things, but all of this is basic stuff. So hopefully that's now, as that's looping through, you can see some changes there. You can see some workbooks have now been hidden. As that loops through, let's go and have a look. I think Gmail was the email account that I used to send that to. So when we click refresh, hopefully, there we go. There's the first report that's been created. The speed of this is really just based around Microsoft's environment. Unfortunately, it means that depending on the number of actions you've got, it can be reasonably slow, but it does run it automatically in the background. Let's see if my PDF works. It doesn't. No, I've done something wrong. That piece around the body and the 365 happened there, so that means it didn't create the PDF properly. But if we go back to our folder here, where we created our PDF originally, so we have got our PDFs created properly. We just haven't attached that correctly to the email. So that's going to keep running in the background. Let's see where it's up to. It's going on south. It's taking its time. It's a bit slower than normal. So throughout this project, and we'll come back and look at those final results in a moment. So this is what we've done. We've got a simple table that is our control. We've changed a few cells. We've changed them to PDFs, and we've sent them to relevant individuals. Now, those triggers, so we've just used a button. That might not be the best trigger that you want to use. There's other common triggers. So that's the one that we used. But you might use a trigger that when an email arrives. So when an email arrives, it runs a specific process. So you can set up your own process that literally when you email yourself with the word run something, it will then run that process for you. You can use the when file is modified. So each time a file is modified, it can track various cells and decide when it wants to run those flows. As a premium connector, there is when a HTTP request is received, and you can create buttons using Office scripts, and then your Office script can then send a HTTP request. So you can trigger a Power Automate flow from Excel through an Office script, but that is a premium connector. Also, because Power Automate is online, there's a phone app. You can even lay in your bed and on your phone, you can click Run Flow, and that will equally start this flow. So what we've seen through this example is that we've built a library of so far 2 reusable codes. So the first one just changed cell values. That's the only thing it did. The second one, all it did was hid value or made all the worksheets visible and then just displayed the ones that we want. So what we can do is think about, well, how do we start to build up this library of reusable Office scripts? Now, I admit that each time we run something in Power Automate, there is a time overhead on that. So therefore, you might decide that you want to join these things together in one big script. But in terms of iterating fast and getting to the point where you can build out these flows quickly, having a library of small reusable scripts is key. So let's just see how far we've got to with our refresh process. There you go. All of those have now run. So each of those have got their own PDF. Let's have a look at our PDFs here. So Central just has a single page, which is what we wanted. If we look at all regions, we should have the summary page, but then also each of those sub-reports in the background. So we can set this up to run with different sheets depending on who different users are and what they want to use. So we've still got a few minutes left. Let's just briefly talk about project number 2. We'll talk about how this works. So project number 2, we've got here's a table, for example. It just contains some bank transactions. And let's say you work in finance and every day you save down the bank download and you upload it or you copy it into OneDrive or SharePoint or somewhere. That action of uploading that file then triggers a flow that then populates this table, changes, recalculates the numbers, updates the chart, and then sends an email to the CFO saying, here's the current cash balance. So let's have a look at that as a flow. Let's go back. And then my flows. I've got one here. So if we just look at how this flow runs, and you'll see that we've got, again, a library of scripts that we're using. So when a file is created, it starts by running a script, and this script is called get used range from workbook. So all that does is whatever workbook you run that script on, it gets that used range as an array. It passes it back to Power Automate. We have another script, paste that array into an Excel table. So that's how we get from one workbook to another. That pastes those values in. We've got another script, get image from Excel. So that gets an image of that chart. And then finally, we get the value from that range, and that then goes into our email. So you can see here that we have the email that we're going to send. And we have our placeholders here for our chart and also for the value. So let me just grab our thing here. Let me come back. So let's just head over into OneDrive. Let's find our file that we need to use. So NWTT examples, we have this bank downloads option, and over in another item over here. So let's say I've just downloaded the bank statement from whoever our bank is. I'm just going to drop that into our bank downloads file. That's now going to start our Power Automate flow. If we look at our flow on here, click refresh, at some point it'll say that it's started to run. So it started 19 seconds ago. Now, all I'm going to do, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second because I just want to open my emails and show you what this email looks like when it has been received. It's just because I don't know if I've received anything confidential in the last few minutes. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and then I will open up Outlook. There we go. Let me just move that across over here. Now, open that email.
Just realised I was on mute. So yeah, you don't want to share all your confidential details live.
That's not my plan anyway. So let me share my screen again, just so you can see this email. So we've got our, if you can see my screen there, you can see the email that was then sent by this process. Just get my second screen sorted out now.
Just got now.
And yeah, there we go. So you can now see that we have, that's the email, and that's the latest value. So all of that was updated by the fact that we dropped in a new cash balance. There's lots of like smaller processes that you can use this for, but the key thing is it's about building up that library of reusable scripts that you can then interact with Excel or just use scripts by themselves, and you can use them in any project you like because they're reusable, right? So it doesn't matter once you build them once, you can use them in any project. I said because you're calling those scripts more than, because you might end up calling like 10 scripts, right? And that might add a bit too much overhead. So later on, you might decide, let's put all this into one script. So therefore, we get the benefit of the speed. But in terms of creating it first time, building up this library is a great thing to do. So if you're interested about some of the scripts that I looked at in project number 2, so there's a couple of blog posts there that has the code for those scripts. So just there you're thinking, well, how do I get images of charts and things that I can then put in an email in Power Automate? There's the blog post there, and there's also how you move data between workbooks using Office scripts and Power Automate. There's some other resources there for this kind of stuff. I'd recommend Daniel Bird. He's a Microsoft. I think he was an MVP. I think he's now an employee of Microsoft, but he's got some great stuff on Office scripts. So I'd highly recommend that. There's a group over at LinkedIn, and there's also stuff on my blog and elsewhere. So that is that's it. I think we're roughly on time. Oh, I've got a course on Office scripts if anyone's interested. It's Black Friday, so there is a sale on that if anyone is interested. Apart from that, James, I'll hand over to you. If anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, yeah.
All right, yeah, so well done. That was really good. So I always love getting people on who clearly know their stuff and you know your way around, especially when Microsoft keep changing the game on you. It's hard to keep on top of the changes, but you clearly are all over it. So well done, good session. If anyone's got any queries, now's the time. Otherwise, I'll do the draw for the £50 Amazon gift voucher. I think that's on that then. So if you give us 2 seconds, I'll share the screen. Make sure I'm sharing the right screen. You should be seeing a random number generator.
You can.
Yeah, so starting from yourself, there are 7 people other than me online. So we'll go 1 to 7. I'm going to generate, and we'll see where we go. So
the tension.
Well, I've been, do you know what? I've queried before whether I was doing this fairly. So this is the list I'm working off. 1 at the top, 7 at the bottom. So generate number 4. Mark, Anna, Gareth, and Rajesh. So Rajesh, you have won the gift voucher. Congratulations. Well done.
Well done, Rajesh.
Rajesh, if you can ping me on Meetup or on this chat with your email address, if you're happy to. Otherwise, just put it on Meetup, and I will send over the gift card. It's a long digit you type into Amazon, and then you'll get a £50 sterling equivalent. So, thank you, Mark. That was really useful, especially seeing with a background of VBA, the Office scripts just seem so much more polished It's
Yeah,
like,
well, it's not 30 years old, is it? That's the
yeah, show my age there. But yeah, no, some of that stuff's really cool. Especially good use case to show as well. I can really see people who regularly open a spreadsheet, filter to one thing, send it to one person, filter to another thing, send it to another person. It's a perfect use case to demonstrate that.
Yeah, because there's triggers that you don't have in Excel. So, for example, it might be that because you can set those triggers to run, it means that you actually, in VBA, you've at least got to open your workbook and click your button.
Yep.
With Office scripts, if you have to send the same things every day, every week, every month, and whatever the latest things are, you can just set them up and they'll just run. And then equally, you can set up so that if they don't run, if there's an error for whatever reason, it'll send you an email to say this hasn't run correctly. You get notified, and then you can go and fix it. So it really is a set up and do nothing solution. So just an example, I had a client who used to run these workbooks every day, and I came up with this simple Office script solution that saved them 45 minutes every day, which doesn't sound a huge amount, but when you think about that, it ends up being, I think it ended up being like 11% of their working time or something.
Wow.
Which we set just by these simple processes. And it just happens that when they receive an email with a CSV file attached, the Office script just does whatever it needs to, sends the reports out to whoever needs to receive them. So yeah, it's a simple tool that fits inside nicely between Excel and Power Automate, but there's a lot that people can do with it.
Yeah, and what you say about fitting between. So I'm thinking now of a client I've got who receive a CSV on email. So you could use Power Automate to go grab that, save it somewhere, use your CSV to Excel script to turn it back
100%.
into Excel. So it's hooking all these things up in sequence.
And that's exactly the scenario that I had, and that was it literally, so they were doing all that themselves, and it meant that they didn't touch anything. The CSV just got sent by whatever server, and they did nothing.
Yeah, even like CSV up to chart, you could automate probably the creation of a chart if you wanted to, if it's
completely
tabular data. So yeah, it's really good. And the other thing is, it's not just time saving; it's also accuracy. If you're doing something 10 times a day, or when you're doing the same thing every single day, you get bored and you start. I wouldn't say half-arse it, but you focus less maybe if you're constantly doing the same thing. Automation doesn't get tired or bored; it just does the same thing. So it's perfect for that. So cool. So Rajesh is typing now. But I thank you for your time, Mark. It's been really good.
Thank you very much.
And if you've got any other use cases you want to show off, I'd happily have you back on, and we'll do that. Thank you for your time. And see you on the next one.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, everyone.